What's up guys, I'm Roderick, aka Rodman, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be ranking every single game in the Souls franchise on level of difficulty. As we all know, the Souls games are very brutal, they're very difficult, and they're very unforgiving. If you like retro video gaming content, anime content, and gameplay videos, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. So let's get right into the video. I think this is a pretty easy choice for the easiest Souls game. It's gonna have to go to Demon Souls. It was the first Souls game ever. If you didn't know, it came out way back on the PS3. And what makes this game so easy is like 95% of the boss fights in this game are known as gimmick boss fights, so it's not an actual fight per se. Really, it's almost like a Zelda boss fight, to where you have to attack one glaring weakness and that's going to pretty much chunk their health down, but you have to find that weakness though. And for example, in other Souls games, it's not really like that. It's more of learning move sets, dodging and rolling out of those moves to find openings. But don't get it twisted, Demon Souls is still somewhat difficult. What makes this game hard is gonna have to be the areas. In other Souls games, you get multiple bonfires per area. In Demon Souls, you get one bonfire per area. You have limited heals, and it can be frustrating. On top of that, when you die, you lose half your health, just like you do in Dark Souls 2. So that is what I believe the easiest Souls game is. So let's move on to the next game. So what I believe the second easiest game in the franchise is, it's gonna have to be Dark Souls 3. And the reason why I say this, From Software, the people who make the Souls games, as a lot of you know, actually they said that they made Dark Souls 3 easier on purpose, just so it can be a good entry level game into the series. And there are a few things that they did to make this possible. One thing is they made the combat somewhat fast, but not fast enough to where it's something like a Bloodborne. But they made rolling very fast. Also, you can roll in any direction you want, which is very cool. In Dark Souls 1, you actually could only roll in one direction, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But Dark Souls 3 overall is a pretty easy game. Okay, when I say easy, take that with a grain of salt, because these are Souls games and they're all pretty hard. But Dark Souls 3 is a relatively easy game in the grand scheme of things. There are some really hard bosses like the Nameless King, Madir, as you're seeing now, and Slave Knight Gale. Other than that though, I don't think that there is any boss in this game that should give you too much trouble. Like I said, From Software purposely made this game easier so new players of the Souls series have a good game to get started with. So that's my take on the second hardest, or the second easiest Souls game in the Souls series. So let's move on to the next game. So for the third easiest game in the Souls series, I'm going to say Dark Souls 1, because the base game is actually pretty easy. The only difficult boss fight that I would say in the base game that should give people trouble is the one that you're seeing right now on the screen, Ornstein and Smough. If you don't recognize that handsome guy on the right, that is me, and this is the video I did where I fought Ornstein and Smough, if you want to check that out, for the first time, by the way. But the DLC bosses, that's where things get really difficult, like Manus and Artorias. Those bosses are quite difficult, but other than that, you shouldn't really be having that big of problem. with Dark Souls 1. The real problem is going to come with the areas. For example, you have like the Anor Londo archers, like stuff like that, just being annoying and trying to make your day bad. And another thing that makes Dark Souls 1 pretty difficult is this game doesn't have omnidirectional rolling, which means that you can only roll in your cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. You can't roll diagonally or anything like that. So that's going to make combat a bit clunky. But other than that, Dark Souls 1 is pretty easy. So let's move on to number 4. So smack dab in the middle, I have one of my personal favorite video games ever created, Bloodborne. I think that Bloodborne can be difficult, but for the most part, you shouldn't be having too much trouble with this game. That's why I have it right smack dab in the middle. Now, there are some excruciatingly difficult boss fights, like the one you're seeing on the screen. This guy right here is probably top 3 most difficult fights in the entire series. But there are just amazing features in Bloodborne that just makes fighting very, not easy, but easier than the rest of the Souls game. And a prime example of that is the beautiful Chef Kiss rally system. The rally system pretty much is, if you take damage, you have a window of time where you can attack the person or the thing that damaged you and get that health back. Bloodborne encourages being aggressive because you're a hunter. You're supposed to be aggressive. You're supposed to be taking these guys out. So you're encouraged to be really aggressive. The combat is extremely fast paced, which also means that you can get away with roll spamming, which in turn makes the game easier. But Bloodborne is just an amazing game. In the base game, there really shouldn't be a lot of bosses that give you trouble. All the really difficult bosses are going to come in the DLC. That's pretty much the case with every Souls game. But some notable bosses that gave me trouble were Lawrence. Lawrence is probably the hardest boss fight for me in this game. And who else? That's honestly pretty much it. Like, for example, on my first run, I beat Orphan on the first try. I was super hype about that. I wish I recorded it. But I beat Orphan on the first try. But I'm not going to ramble on too much. I love Bloodborne, but I think it's right smack dab in the middle of difficulty in terms of Soul games. So let's move on to the next game. So the next game on the list, I'm going to put Elden Ring. Actually, if you didn't know, Elden Ring was my first Souls game, and it was really hard to the point where I just kind of stopped playing the game. I got destroyed by Margit like 50 times, and I was like, you know what, this game is just not for me. I'm really glad that I gave the game another try, and I'm falling in love with the series. But anyways, the reason why Elden Ring is so difficult, and a lot of veteran Souls players can, confirm this. Delay attacks. And also on top of that, to mitigate the fact that bosses have lower health pools, they can one-shot you in like 1 to 2 hits. It's kind of absurd. To beat these bosses, you pretty much have to play perfectly. A lot of these bosses have grab moves that one-shot you, especially Godfrey, like you see on the screen right here. He has a suplex move that pretty much one-shots you. It's ridiculous. But Elden Ring is an amazing game. I hope that it wins Game of the Year. I don't know if it is though, because God of War is looking crazy. Not trying to get off tangent, but Elden Ring is pretty dang hard. I'm not gonna lie. But I will say this though. I think that Elden Ring is it's like a perfect game to get into the series. Why? Because it's open world, which means that if you're struggling, like for example, let's say you're getting your butt kicked by Godfrey, you can leave and go fight other bosses, level up, get stronger, and come back and fight Godfrey and hopefully beat him, right? You know what? Power up your mimic, power up your weapons, and do all those sorts of things. But Elden Ring is a pretty difficult game. It is one of the harder Souls games. But let's move on to the next game. So for the next game on the list, I have Dark Souls 2. Now, my experience with Dark Souls 2 was pretty much the same as a lot of people's experience with Dark Souls 2. It was really hard. It was really hard. And it was hard because of just a lot of different reasons. One main reason being that iframes work differently in this game. Pretty much what you're trying to do in Dark Souls 2 when it comes to rolling is you're not trying to roll into a boss and get iframes so you have the timing to get your attacks in. What you're going to do in Dark Souls 2 pretty much is you're going to be literally using your roll as a roll to dodge their attacks, which I guess makes more sense because in real life you don't have iframes. You're going to be rolling and dodging to move out of the way of a weapon. But it's frustrating in the video game. It really is. And on top of that, the areas are brutal. They are brutal. A lot of this poor, and I don't want to rip into the game or anything, but I have to right now. But this poor enemy placement, the fact that, you know, you walk through a fog door and you'll get hit by like 10 enemies and die. You get sent back to the bonfire. It's ridiculous. A lot of the boss arenas aren't very good. For example, one that comes to mind is Dragon Rider. That small boss room with a giant dude. He keeps on pushing you off. Stuff like that, I believe, it just makes the game just unnecessarily difficult. I'm really glad that, you know, From Software learned from their mistakes and decided to fix a lot of the glaring mistakes that Dark Souls 2 had. Now, don't get me wrong, Dark Souls 2 is a great game. It's one of the greatest RPGs ever made. But these reasons that I stated before make the game really hard to play. On top of that, hitboxes are really janky. Like, you'll dodge a move, like a grab move, and you'll still get grabbed. Stuff like that is ridiculously cheesy. And honestly, that's what I'll say what Dark Souls 2 is. It's really cheesy. I don't know about it being... It's difficult. I still will put it as the second hardest Souls game. But it's more cheesy and cheap than it is like genuinely difficult. But last but not least, let's move on to the final game. You guys probably already have guessed it by now. So for the most difficult Souls game in the series, I'm going to have to put Sekiro for sure. And one main reason is that the combat is just way different than any other video game ever created. It's nothing like a traditional Souls game. It has a very give and take sort of, you know, flow of battle compared to the dodge and wait for an opening that most of the Souls games have. So pretty much Sekiro is based off parrying attacks, and pretty much what you're not trying to do necessarily is get their health bar all the way down. There are some bosses where it's more beneficial to get their health bar down. One person I can think about right off the top of my head is Guardian Ape. You pretty much want to just get his health bar down. But what you want to do in Sekiro is you want to build their poise meter. which means you need to pair their attacks perfectly and hit them. But Sekiro, it's, and you know, actually, now that I say this, how do y'all pronounce it? Is it Sekiro or is it Sekiro? I say Sekiro. But anyways, Sekiro is very, very difficult. There's a lot of status ailments and stuff. It's just very awkward. But there's some things that do make the game a lot easier. And I'll say this though, once you master Sekiro, like, it's the easiest Souls game probably, besides Demon Souls, because that sort of combat style, once you really get the flow down, it's almost like a rhythm game. Once you get that rhythm down, like, you're going to be unbeatable. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video, man. That's my take on what the hardest Souls games are, ranked from the easiest to hardest. So if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. Ramen out. Peace.